At my grandson's birthday, I looked at my seat, and there it was, a small bold label reading "Unwanted Guest." My heart sank, but I didn't let it show. I just smiled, sat down, and stayed silent. I knew this day was coming, but I never expected it to hurt this much. Everyone was busy laughing and chatting, but no one even looked my way. It felt like I had become invisible in my own family. I thought back to when I first held Jason in my arms as a baby. I had watched him grow, celebrated every milestone, and now here I was being treated like I didn't matter. The whole day, all I could hear were the sounds of my family having a good time, completely unaware of the sting that was burning through me. The table was set, the cake was perfect, but there was something missing: respect. That simple label on my seat said everything I needed to know. It wasn't about the party, it was about how my family saw me. And honestly, that hurt more than I could express. I could feel my hands tremble slightly as I picked up my fork, but I kept my composure. I wasn't going to let them see the effect their words and actions had on me. They didn't deserve that satisfaction. As I looked around the room, I saw Jason and his parents enjoying themselves, sharing inside jokes and laughter. I wanted to join them, but I knew that wasn't my place anymore. I was no longer a part of their world in the way I once was. They had moved on without me. Jason glanced my way for a split second, but only to see if I was still there, not out of any real concern. His eyes quickly shifted back to his friends, his focus entirely on them. His mother, Carly, was busy making sure everything was perfect, laughing louder than anyone else in the room, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She had always been polite to me, but today, I saw something cold in her demeanor. Something different. I stayed silent, keeping my thoughts to myself. They were the ones who had changed, not me. And I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I couldn't help but think back to all the years I had spent helping out, supporting them financially. When they were struggling, giving them a place to stay when they needed it. Where had that love gone? Was it all just to use me when they needed something? Were they only around when they wanted something from me? It felt like I had been forgotten, dismissed, and now I was just an afterthought. But I wasn't going to cry, I wasn't going to make a scene. I would hold my head high just like I always had. This was just another chapter in my life, and I would move on one way or another. I hadn't planned on making a scene at my grandson's birthday, but deep inside I knew something needed to change. I had been silent for far too long. It was time for them to see that I wasn't weak, that I wouldn't just roll over and accept their treatment. I wasn't asking for much, just a little respect. But that's something you can't ask for. You either get it or you don't. As the party continued, I could feel the sting of every laugh that didn't include me, every moment where I was forgotten. The label on my seat wasn't just a symbol of my exclusion. It was a reminder that the family I had once been a part of had moved on without me. But I wasn't going to let that define me. I had raised my children with love, and now it was time to love myself enough to walk away from those who didn't appreciate it. As the laughter echoed in the room, I could feel the weight of my decision settling in. I wasn't going to be anyone's second thought anymore. Not now, not ever again. I sat in the corner of the room, trying to ignore the whispers and laughter that filled the air. It was as if I didn't even exist anymore. The sound of the party echoed in my ears, each burst of laughter, each clink of glasses, each moment that went by without anyone acknowledging my presence. The label on my seat felt like a weight I couldn't shake off. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a symbol. A symbol of everything that had changed. A symbol of how the family I had loved for so long had turned their backs on me. As I sat there pretending to be part of it all, I thought about how things had gotten to this point. I had always been there for them. I had supported my son, my daughter-in-law, and even Jason when they needed help. But where was that support now? Where were they when I needed them? The cake sat untouched in front of me. The candles had long since burned out, and the frosting was slowly melting under the warm light. I stared at it, lost in thought, wondering if they even noticed that I was sitting there. Every now and then I caught a glimpse of Jason laughing with his friends, his attention never straying to me. I felt a pang in my chest. It was like I was invisible not just to him but to the whole family. I had given everything for them. I had been there when they needed someone to lean on, someone to support them through their struggles. But now, when I was the one who needed support, I was alone. Carly, my daughter-in-law, had been polite at first, but I could see the coldness in her eyes now. She had always been a bit distant, but this was different. The warmth she once had for me was gone, replaced with something colder, something more calculating. I watched her as she moved around the room, laughing with others, organizing things, making sure everything was perfect. But it wasn't for me. It was for them. And I wasn't part of that anymore. A part of me wanted to get up, to leave, to walk out of the room and never come back. But I didn't. I stayed. I stayed because I had always been there no matter what. I stayed because that's what you do when you love your family, even when they don't love you back. But as I sat there, a small part of me began to wonder, was this how it would always be? Would I always be the one left behind, the one ignored? Would I always be the one who had to swallow her pain in silence? Or would I finally stand up for myself? The thought scared me. For so many years I had been the one who held everything together. I had been the one who made sure the family stayed united, that the traditions were upheld, that no one felt left out. But now it felt like I was the one who had been left out. And the worst part was that I wasn't sure if anyone even cared. The laughter continued. Jason was telling a joke, and everyone was laughing. It was as if the world was moving on without me. But I couldn't leave. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Because leaving would mean admitting that they had won. Leaving would mean admitting that I wasn't important to them anymore. I had to stay even if it hurt. I had to stay, even if it meant sitting in silence, watching the life I once had slip away. As the party went on, I found myself lost in thought. My mind kept drifting back to the years when Jason was a child. When he was little, I had been everything to him. I had been the one who took him to the park, who helped him with his homework, who made sure he always felt loved. But now all of that seemed so far away. It was like a dream that had faded, a memory that was slowly being erased. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had given up for them. How many of my own dreams had I pushed aside to help them with theirs? And now here I was alone. It wasn't just the label on my seat that hurt. It was the realization that I had been forgotten. Forgotten by the people I loved the most. As I sat there, pretending to be part of the celebration, I wondered if I would ever be able to look at them the same way again. Would I ever be able to forgive them for the way they had treated me? Would I ever be able to forget the pain they had caused? I didn't know. All I knew was that something had changed. Something inside me had shifted. And I wasn't sure if it would ever go back to the way it was before. The cake in front of me was now half-eaten, the frosting smeared across the plate. I hadn't touched it, not because I wasn't hungry, but because I wasn't sure I could enjoy anything anymore. I wasn't sure I could enjoy anything when the people I had given so much to were so willing to toss me aside. The party was winding down. People were starting to leave. But I didn't feel any better. The hurt was still there, lingering in the back of my mind. I wanted to say something, to confront them, to make them understand how much they had hurt me. But I didn't. I just smiled and stayed silent, just like I had done all these years. The house was quieter now, the laughter fading into the background. As I looked around the room, I realized that maybe it was time to stop pretending. Maybe it was time to let go. I had spent so many years trying to hold on, trying to make everyone else happy, that I had forgotten about myself. Maybe it was time for me to start taking care of me. The thought was both freeing and terrifying. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of something inside me. Something that wasn't just about keeping everyone else happy. Something that was just about me. As the evening wore on, the party began to wind down, but the weight of the moment felt heavier than ever. The laughter and music faded, leaving behind a quiet emptiness that filled the room. I sat still long after everyone else had left, lost in my thoughts. I had been sitting there for hours pretending everything was fine, pretending I wasn't hurt, but deep inside, the pain was becoming harder to ignore. I had done everything for this family. Everything. I had spent my life making sure they were happy, making sure they had everything they needed. And now here I was discarded as if I meant nothing. I thought about how I had always been the one to hold everything together. I had taken care of the house, I had raised my children with love, I had supported my son and his family through thick and thin. But what did I get in return? I wasn't even allowed to be part of my own grandson's birthday without being treated like an outsider. The cold sting of that label on my seat still burned in my mind. I had been so foolish to think that, after everything, they would appreciate me. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been nothing more than a convenience for them, a source of help when they needed it, a safety net when things got tough. But when the tables turned, when I needed them, I was no longer important. I was just the old woman in the corner, the one they barely noticed, the one who no longer fit into their perfect little world. I couldn't help but wonder when it had all changed. When had they stopped caring? When had they started seeing me as a burden? Was it the moment my husband passed away? Or had it been happening long before that? My mind raced back to the days before his death, when things were still simple, when I felt like part of a family. But now it felt like I was living in a different world, one where my presence no longer mattered. I had been so focused on taking care of everyone else, on being the strong one, that I hadn't noticed how far they had drifted away from me, how they had stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a tool to be used and discarded when they were done with it. I thought about my son David and how he used to be so close to me, how he used to come to me for advice, how he used to spend time with me, just the two of us. But now it was like he didn't even remember the person I used to be. He had his own life now, his own family, and I was just a distant memory. Carly, my daughter-in-law, had always been distant, but it hadn't always been this bad. She had once been kind, even if she wasn't the warmest person. But now she treated me like I was invisible. I remembered how just a few months ago, she had asked me for money to help pay for Jason's school fees, and I had gladly given it to her. I had never expected anything in return, but now I wondered if that was just another way for her to get what she wanted, a way to keep me in line, to make sure I knew my place. I thought about Jason, my grandson, and how much I loved him. I had always tried to be a part of his life, to show him that I cared. But it was clear now that I was no longer a priority for him. He was caught up in his own world, his own friends, and I was just another face in the background. I wanted to shake him, to make him understand how much I had done for him, how much I had sacrificed for this family. But I knew that wasn't the answer. I couldn't force him to care. I couldn't make him see me for who I really was. The truth was, I had spent so many years trying to please everyone else, trying to keep the peace, that I had forgotten about myself. I had forgotten about what I wanted, what I needed. I had been so focused on making sure everyone else was happy that I had lost sight of my own happiness. And now, sitting here alone, in the aftermath of the birthday party, I realized that I had given up so much of myself to keep this family together. But no more. I was tired of being the one who was always there for everyone else, without anyone being there for me. I was tired of being invisible, of being treated like I didn't matter. I had spent too many years putting everyone else first, and it had gotten me nothing in return. It was time to stop. It was time to take care of myself. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I knew I couldn't keep going the way I had been. I had spent so much time giving and giving, expecting love and appreciation in return, but it was never enough. Now I realized that I had to stop expecting anything from them. I had to stop letting their actions define me. I had to stop letting their indifference control how I felt. The next day, I woke up with a new sense of clarity. I wasn't going to let this family or anyone else treat me like I was invisible. I wasn't going to let them take advantage of me anymore. I was going to take control of my life, even if it meant stepping away from them, even if it meant letting go of the family I had spent so many years building. Because in the end, I realized that I was the only one who could change my situation. I was the only one who could decide my worth, and I wasn't going to let anyone else define it for me. The days after the birthday party passed by in a blur, but the sting of that moment never fully faded. I tried to distract myself with household chores, keeping my hands busy, but my mind kept drifting back to the same painful thought. How had I let things get this far? I was no longer a part of their lives in any meaningful way. It felt like I had been slowly pushed out, step by step, until there was no place left for me. And yet I still found myself clinging to the hope that one day something would change, that they would realize how much I had given them, how much I had sacrificed. But deep down I knew that wasn't going to happen. They had made their choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. The house felt different now, emptier somehow. The silence was deafening. I spent most of my days sitting in my favorite chair by the window, watching the world go by. The trees outside were just starting to lose their leaves, signaling the change of seasons, but inside, everything felt frozen. I thought about the years I had spent raising my children, taking care of them, giving them everything I had. I thought about my husband and how he had always been my rock, my partner. But now with him gone, I felt more alone than ever. The world around me had continued on without pause, while I was left behind. I had always believed that family was the most important thing, that no matter what happened, we would always be there for each other. But now I saw that I had been wrong. Family, at least my family, was no longer a place of love and support. It had become a place of convenience, a place where people only cared when they needed something. I had been the one who gave, and now I was the one who was left with nothing. I tried to reach out to David to ask him if there was something I had done wrong, something I had missed, but every time I called, he never picked up. It was as if he was avoiding me, and maybe he was. Maybe he didn't want to deal with me anymore. Maybe he was just too busy with his own life to care about the woman who had once been his mother. And Carly, his wife, had become even more distant. I had always tried to keep the peace between them, but now it seemed like they were both content to ignore me. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was also an eye-opener. I realized that I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep waiting for them to change. I couldn't keep hoping that one day they would realize how much I meant to them. I had to stop expecting something that would never come. One evening, as I sat alone in my quiet house, the weight of the silence pressing down on me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them define my worth any longer. I wasn't going to be their backup plan, their safety net, their afterthought. I had spent too much of my life taking care of everyone else, and now it was time to take care of me. I stood up and walked to the small desk in the corner of the room, where I kept my papers and documents. I knew what I needed to do. I took out a piece of paper and began to write a letter to David. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say, but I knew it had to be said. I was tired of being the one who was always left behind, the one who had to be content with the scraps. I was tired of being invisible in my own family. I wrote, "David, I know we haven't spoken much lately, and I know things have changed between us. But I want you to understand something. I've always been there for you, for your family, and I've always done everything I could to help. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep giving when I'm not receiving anything in return. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not. I've spent so many years putting everyone else first, and now it's time for me to take care of myself. I'm letting go. I'm stepping away from this family, from the people who have made me feel like I don't matter. I don't know if you'll ever understand why I'm doing this, but I hope one day you will. I love you, but I have to love myself first." I signed the letter and folded it neatly. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if David would even read it or if he would care. But I knew that I had to do this for myself. I couldn't keep living in a world where I was treated like I was invisible. I had given everything to this family, and now I was taking it all back. The next morning, I walked to the post office and mailed the letter. I didn't look back as I left the building. I didn't look back when I returned home. I was done looking back. It was time for me to move forward, to find my own peace, my own happiness. I spent the next few days focusing on myself, taking long walks in the park, reading books I had forgotten about, and simply enjoying the quiet. I found a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in years. I realized that I didn't need their approval, their attention, or their love to be happy. I could find happiness on my own. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the loneliness crept in, but I kept moving forward. I had made the decision to take control of my life, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that away from me. I had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together, but now it was time to be strong for myself. And that was the most powerful thing I had ever done. The days that followed the decision to step away from my family were the quietest I had ever experienced. The house, which once echoed with the laughter and voices of my children, now felt empty. I had removed myself from their lives, but somehow it didn't feel as final as I expected. I kept thinking about the things I had left behind, the phone calls I used to receive from David, the visits from Jason when he was younger, the family gatherings that now felt like distant memories. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had been holding on to a version of the family that no longer existed. The truth was, I had been more of an obligation to them than a person they truly cared about. And as hard as it was to admit, I had to let go of that old version of them. I had to accept that they had moved on and that I could not continue to live in a world where I was being used and forgotten. I spent a lot of time reflecting on my own life. I had always defined myself by my role as a mother, a grandmother, and a wife. But now, without those roles to hold me together, I had to figure out who I was again. It wasn't easy and it wasn't fast. The first few days felt like a blur, as though I were floating in limbo, unsure of what to do next. But then something started to shift inside me. I began to focus on the things I had neglected for so long: my own health, my own happiness, and my own peace. I started taking walks around the neighborhood, something I hadn't done in years. I would stroll down the tree-lined streets, listening to the birds, feeling the breeze on my skin, and slowly, I began to feel a sense of calm that I hadn't known in ages. It was a small thing, but it was a start. The more I spent time alone, the more I realized how much I had allowed myself to be caught up in the needs and wants of others. I had spent so many years bending over backward to keep everyone happy, to keep the family together, that I had forgotten about myself. I had put my own needs last, and in doing so I had lost myself. I had been living for everyone else and not for me. Slowly, I started rediscovering the things I loved. I took up knitting again, something I hadn't done in years. I spent more time in the garden, tending to the flowers that had been neglected for so long. I read books I had forgotten about, allowing myself to lose myself in their pages, escaping into worlds that were mine and mine alone. It felt liberating. But there were still moments when the loneliness crept in. Even though I was surrounded by the memories of my family, I couldn't shake the emptiness I felt. I knew I had made the right decision, but it didn't make it any easier. There were still days when I missed them. Missed the connection, missed the laughter, missed the feeling of being part of something bigger. But then I reminded myself, I wasn't the one who had walked away. They had. And I wasn't going to chase after them anymore. I wasn't going to beg for their love or their attention. I had spent too many years doing that, and it had never been enough. It was time for me to take control of my own life. It was time for me to stop waiting for them to notice me. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a shift. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew that I was in control now. I wasn't going to let my family define me any longer. I wasn't going to let them take away my sense of self-worth. I was going to live my life for me. And if they wanted to be a part of it, they would have to come to me. I wouldn't chase after them anymore. As the weeks passed, I started to see things differently. I realized that I had been holding on to a version of family that no longer existed, and it was time to let go. I had given so much of myself to them, but I had never received that same love in return. Now I was learning to love myself again. I was learning to take care of myself, to prioritize my own needs, and to stop feeling guilty for doing so. It was a hard lesson to learn, but it was one I needed. I had spent so many years thinking that my worth was tied to my family, but now I knew the truth. My worth was tied to me, and that was something no one could take away. I still thought about them, of course. I still missed the old days when we were all close and everything felt right. But I also knew that I couldn't live in the past. I had to move forward, and that meant embracing who I was now, not who I used to be. I wasn't the person they had known. I wasn't the mother, the wife, the grandmother they thought I was. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had finally learned to stand up for herself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of who I was becoming. It had been weeks since I sent the letter to David. I hadn't heard from him, and honestly I didn't expect to. Part of me was still holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he would reach out. But another part of me, the part that had begun to rebuild, knew that I couldn't wait for someone else to validate my choices. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't as unbearable as it used to be. In fact, I was beginning to appreciate it. The silence allowed me to think, to reflect, and to finally hear my own thoughts without the noise of other people's opinions. I had spent so many years trying to please everyone else, trying to make sure that everyone around me was happy, that I had lost sight of what I needed. But now, for the first time in a long time, I was doing things for myself. And it felt good. I started spending more time doing the things I had always enjoyed but had put on hold for far too long. I picked up gardening again, something I had always loved but had neglected in recent years. There was something peaceful about tending to the flowers, watching them grow and bloom. It reminded me that even in the toughest of times, life could still be beautiful. I also started to travel, something I hadn't done in ages. First, I was hesitant. The thought of going somewhere alone was intimidating. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I deserved this. I didn't need anyone else's permission to live my life. So I booked a trip to a small coastal town in Maine. It was quiet, peaceful, and far from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. The first few days there were surreal. I walked along the beach, feeling the cool saltwater breeze on my skin, and I realized how much I had been missing out on by staying tied to the past. I was rediscovering a part of myself that had been buried for so long. On the third day of my trip, I received a call from Sophie. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks, but she had always been a steady presence in my life. She had known me before I became so wrapped up in everyone else's problems, before I had forgotten who I was. "Martha, how are you?" Sophie asked, her voice warm and comforting. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately." I smiled at her concern. "I'm doing better, Sophie," I said, my voice steady. "I'm taking some time for myself. It's been hard, but I'm starting to find peace." Sophie was quiet for a moment, as if processing what I had said. "I'm proud of you, Martha. You deserve this. You've always put everyone else first. It's time you did something for yourself." Her words were a balm to my soul. Sophie had always been there for me, through thick and thin. She was the one person who understood the weight I had carried for so many years. We talked for a while longer, catching up on each other's lives, but I could tell that Sophie was sensing something more, something deeper. "I know it's hard, but you've got to let go of them, Martha. You've given them everything, and they've taken it for granted. You can't keep holding on to something that no longer exists." Her words struck a chord. She was right. I had been holding on to a version of my family that no longer existed. I had been waiting for them to come back to me, to recognize the sacrifices I had made. But the truth was they had already moved on, and I had to move on too. I had to stop holding on to the past and start embracing the future. That night, after my conversation with Sophie, I sat outside and watched the stars. I had always loved stargazing, but I hadn't done it in years. The sky was clear, and the stars sparkled brightly, each one a reminder of the vastness of the world. It was a humbling sight. I realized that there was so much more to life than what I had been focused on. The world was full of possibilities, and I was finally ready to explore them. When I returned home, I felt different. I had a new sense of clarity, a new sense of purpose. I wasn't going to let my family define me anymore. I wasn't going to let their actions or their lack of actions control my happiness. I was going to live for myself, to take care of myself, and to find joy in the little things. The next time I saw David, I would be different. I would be the woman I had always been, but stronger, more confident, and more at peace with myself. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my own life. And that was a feeling I was going to hold on to. It had been several weeks since I had made the decision to focus on myself. The pain from that night, the birthday party where I had been left out, had started to fade, replaced by a quiet strength I hadn't known I had. I had learned to enjoy the silence in my home, something I used to dread. It no longer felt like an emptiness, it was peace. For the first time in years, I was living on my own terms, and it felt freeing. I had spent too many years trying to please everyone else, bending myself to fit their expectations. Now, I wasn't just existing for others, I was finally living for me. One day, as I walked down the familiar path in my neighborhood, I couldn't help but notice how everything seemed brighter, how the world around me was alive in a way I hadn't noticed before. It was as if the weight had been lifted, and the colors were sharper, the air fresher. I realized that all those years of giving myself to others had left me blind to the beauty of my own life. I had spent so much time trying to please them, trying to make sure they were happy, that I had forgotten to take care of myself. But now that had changed. I had started to take small steps toward building a life that was mine. I had begun to enjoy the little things, like the feeling of the sun on my face as I walked, or the comfort of sitting quietly with a cup of tea, watching the rain fall outside. These were the moments I had ignored for so long. They had always been there, but I had been too busy, too focused on everyone else to see them. As time passed, I began to rebuild my sense of self. I enrolled in an art class, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. It wasn't about being good at it. It was about finding joy in creating, in expressing myself. The first time I held a paintbrush, I felt a spark inside me, A reminder of who I was before life became about everyone else. Slowly, the pieces of myself that I had forgotten started to come back. I started to feel a sense of pride in what I was doing, in the person I was becoming. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the loneliness crept back in, but I pushed through. I had learned to be okay with being alone, and I had learned to be okay with putting myself first. One afternoon, as I was finishing a painting I had been working on for weeks, I received an unexpected message. It was from Sophie. She had been my friend for years, and we had shared so many memories, both happy and sad. Her message was simple. "Martha, I've been thinking about you. I hope you're doing okay." I smiled as I read it. Sophie always knew how to check in on me without being overbearing. She understood the space I needed, but she also knew when to reach out. I replied, "I'm doing better, Sophie. I've been finding my way again." Sophie's response was quick. "I'm so glad to hear that. You deserve to be happy." Her words meant more to me than she would ever know. It was a reminder that I wasn't completely alone in this. There were still people who cared, who saw me for who I was, not just for what I could do for them. It had taken me a long time to get to this point, but I finally felt like I was on the right path. I had stopped waiting for others to change, stopped hoping they would come around and realize what they had lost. I had learned that my happiness couldn't be dependent on anyone else. It had to come from within me. That afternoon, as I sat back and looked at my finished painting, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. It was a small thing, but it was mine. It was something I had created, something that had nothing to do with anyone else's expectations or demands. It was a symbol of my growth, my resilience. I was no longer the person I had been, a woman who had spent her life putting everyone else first. I was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned to put herself first. And for the first time in years I felt at peace. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was going to live my life on my own terms. I was no longer waiting for anyone to come back into my life. I had learned to live without them, and that was the most freeing thing I could have ever done. It had been a few months since I made the decision to finally live for myself, and I had come to realize something profound. Letting go was not the same as giving up. It was a freeing experience, one that had slowly allowed me to embrace my independence, to stop holding on to expectations that were never met, and to finally start making decisions based on my own needs. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of being alone felt too heavy to bear. But in those moments I reminded myself that being alone did not mean being unloved, and it certainly didn't mean being weak. I had been strong enough to let go, strong enough to make a choice that was not just for my family but for me. One afternoon, while I was sorting through some old family photographs, a thought crossed my mind. It was something I had been avoiding, something that lingered in the back of my mind since I had distanced myself from everyone. I thought about the moments I had spent with David, Carly, and Jason, moments that were supposed to be full of love and togetherness. But now, all those moments felt like distant memories, moments that belonged to a version of myself that no longer existed. I thought about how much I had invested in them, in their lives, in their happiness, and how little of it had been returned. It wasn't that I regretted the time I spent caring for them. It was that I had forgotten about myself in the process. I had allowed myself to become a background character in my own life. Always there, always ready to help, but never truly seen. And now I realized that it was time for me to step into the foreground. It was time for me to be the main character of my own story. As I sat there looking at the photographs of my family, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because I had given so much, and relief because I was no longer asking for their approval or their love. I had come to terms with the fact that I couldn't change them. I couldn't make them see me the way I wanted to be seen. But I could change how I saw myself. I could choose to love myself, to care for myself, and to make decisions that honored who I was. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose. The day before had been an ordinary one, but today felt different. Today I was going to take another step forward. I didn't know what that step would look like, but I knew that it would be something that aligned with the person I was becoming. I decided to go back to the art class I had started a few months ago. I had enjoyed it so much the first time, and I realized that it had become a part of me that I didn't want to lose. I hadn't been back for a while, but today felt like the right day to pick up where I left off. When I arrived, the familiar sight of the studio filled me with a sense of calm. The soft light, the smell of paint, and the sound of brushes against canvases. It all felt like home. As I set up my easel and prepared to paint, I felt a renewed sense of excitement. This wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was a part of me. It was a way for me to express myself, to release the emotions I had kept hidden for so long. I picked up my paintbrush and began to work. The strokes came easily, and as I painted, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to release. It was as though every brushstroke was a small act of rebellion, a way for me to take back control of my life. For the first time in a long time, I didn't care about how others might perceive my work. It wasn't about making something perfect. It was about making something that felt true to who I was. When I finished, I stood back and looked at the painting. It was nothing extraordinary, but it didn't need to be. What mattered was that it was mine. It was a reflection of my journey, my growth, and my transformation. I had painted my way into a new chapter of my life, one where I wasn't defined by my family or their expectations. As I left the studio that day, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. I realized that I was finally free. I was free from the chains of guilt, free from the need for validation, and free from the weight of being someone I wasn't. I wasn't perfect and I didn't have all the answers, but I was enough. And that was all that mattered. In the days that followed, I continued to focus on myself. I started taking weekend trips to new places, discovering parts of the world I had never seen before. I visited small towns, walked along quiet streets, and sat in cafes where I could just observe the world around me. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of wonder. I had spent so much time living for others, but now I was living for me. It wasn't about finding someone else to love me. It was about learning to love myself. It was about finding joy in the simple things, the moments that had always been there, but that I had never fully appreciated. The more I embraced this new life, the more I realized that I had been holding myself back for so long. I had been waiting for others to change, to love me the way I wanted to be loved, but now I understood that I didn't need that. I was enough on my own. And that was the most liberating feeling in the world. The weeks continued to pass, and with each day I felt a little stronger, a little more sure of the path I had chosen. I had stopped waiting for validation from my family, stopped waiting for their approval, stopped waiting for them to realize what they had lost. The silence between us was no longer uncomfortable. It was peaceful. It was the kind of silence that allowed me to think, to reflect, and to finally focus on what mattered most to me. I had spent so many years giving, sacrificing, and putting others first. Now I was learning to live for myself. I was learning to love myself not because anyone else loved me, but because I finally realized that I deserved that love. One afternoon, while sitting in my garden, I looked at the flowers I had carefully nurtured over the past few months. They were blooming beautifully, each petal vibrant and full of life. It was a quiet reminder of the growth I had experienced. I wasn't the person I had been before. I wasn't the mother, the wife, the grandmother who lived her life for others. I was someone new. Someone who had learned to find joy in the little things. Someone who had learned that happiness doesn't come from the approval of others. It comes from within. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much of my life had been spent waiting. Waiting for my family to change, waiting for them to appreciate me, waiting for things to go back to the way they were. But the truth was, I had been holding on to a version of my family that no longer existed. They had moved on and I had to do the same. I couldn't keep holding on to the past. I couldn't keep wishing for things to be different. It was time to move forward. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. I had finally let go of the idea that my family could give me the love and attention I craved. I had finally let go of the hope that they would change. And in doing so, I found peace. It wasn't that I didn't love them anymore. I did. But I had to stop expecting them to love me the way I wanted to be loved. I had to stop relying on them for my happiness. I had to stop letting their indifference control how I felt. It was liberating to realize that I was no longer waiting for them to come to me. I was no longer waiting for them to see me. I had learned to see myself, and that was enough. One day, I decided to visit a local art gallery. It had been on my list for a while, but I had never made the time to go. I wandered through the rooms, admiring the paintings, the sculptures, and the creativity on display. There was something about art that spoke to me. It wasn't just about the finished product, it was about the process, the expression, the journey. I realized that art was much like life. It wasn't about reaching a destination. It was about embracing the journey, embracing the ups and downs, the good and the bad, the moments of beauty and the moments of struggle. I stood in front of a painting that caught my eye, a piece that was full of color and light. It reminded me of my own journey, the struggles I had faced, the pain I had endured, and the beauty I had found in the process. I took a deep breath and smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud of myself. I had made it through. I had faced the darkest parts of my life and come out stronger on the other side. I was no longer defined by my family's actions or inactions. I was defined by me. I had learned to stand on my own, to walk my own path, and to embrace the person I was becoming. As I left the gallery, I felt a sense of peace that I had never known before. I wasn't waiting for anyone to come back into my life. I wasn't waiting for them to validate my worth. I had already done that for myself. And that was enough. The world was wide open now. There were no more limits, no more expectations, no more waiting. It was just me, and the possibilities were endless. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I was excited to find out.